We're showing live, Mark, on.
Yeah, good to go, Dave.
Yeah. Okay, can I wish you all a warm welcome from Table Tennis Scotland, where we will be looking back at some of our, if not all of our previous 29 sessions, which include 53 guests. Helping me with this task is my former workmate, former national coach, TV commentator, Don Parker, national champion 12 times, Ewan Walker, my right-hand man, international Mark Lundberg, but most importantly, my two international girls, Holly McNamara and Amelia Norbury. We began in March or April with Jill Parker and ended with Des Douglas, both European champions. Well, Jill was the European champion and Des was the top 12 champion. And both of them were top 10 world ranked players. So we had a good start and a good finish. And we also had a good middle. Since we were here last time, we've had a birthday. So happy birthday to Billy Gibbs. And in a few days' time, Peter McQueen, who was a regular coach up here, he will be celebrating his birthday on Christmas Day. Okay, our first session, we just didn't know how it would go, but it brought on our European champion and top 12 winner, Jill Parker, MBE. It was the first session, and Don joined Jill on that session. And before I'm going to ask Don to reflect on that session, he's got a bit of Commonwealth news for us, haven't you, Don?
In terms of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, it's just really to say that everything's going extremely well. The chief executive of the Commonwealth Games is a Scottish gentleman, Ian Reid, who was involved in the games in Glasgow. Everything's progressing really well. Table tennis is looking in great shape. It will be taking place at the exhibition centre, the train station. You get off the train and you can walk to the table tennis hall in 2 or 3 minutes. So it's a perfect location. It will be a great event. There are 4 para gold medals up for grabs this time. There are only 2 medals up for grabs on the Gold Coast. So an increase in the medal haulage. And of course, what the organisers are trying to do, and UK table tennis, Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, working together to try and make sure that the para programme is reflective of our top para table tennis players. So, of course, in Scotland, you have young Mr. Perry, who's an outstanding player, and everything's been done politically to try and make sure that the classifications enable the top players in the UK to participate. Of course, we've got Will Bailey down in, will be representing England. He represented Great Britain in Rio when he won a gold medal. I was commentating on that match and suddenly looked up and he's running across the table, going absolutely bananas, quite rightly so, when he won that gold medal. And then the great scenes, I don't know if you remember, the umpire then gave him a red card for jumping up on the table, a young Japanese umpire, to which he got off the table and hugged her. She wasn't sure what to do at that stage. So great drama with the para table tennis. So yeah, I think we're looking forward to a really good event. It's July, August 2022, and hopefully all our COVID problems will be behind us by that point in time.
Good. Okay, well, Jill was our first guest. It was a new venture then. COVID had only just kicked in. How do you reflect on that first session, Don? Because she was part of it as well.
Yeah, a minor part, I have to say. But I think, first of all, really, just to congratulate you, Dave, and the team. 30 sessions later, it's still going strong. Had some great guests, put together some great shows, skirted around controversy, but it's always stayed on the right side. It's always been good fun. And the numbers that you've had watching have been excellent. So I think that's the first thing to say. Little did Jill and I know that it was the start of great things. So, but, we take no credit for that. Well done to everybody who's been involved. So Jill, Jill was the great player. You said you started with Jill and finished with Des, two of the greatest players I've had the opportunity, the privilege to actually coach them in international competition. Jill, of course, known by Jill Hammersley at the peak of her career. She won the Europeans back in 1976. I'm very sad to say that Jill won the women's singles in 1976 on Prague, and a couple of hours later, Jack Secretan won the men's singles. And of course, we lost Jack Secretan, that great French player, sadly passed away a few months ago. So, I guess we should at some stage make some sort of tribute to what was a fantastic player to watch. So Jill won the Europeans in 76, 3 times the top 12 champion. And I think the top 12 is actually one of the toughest tournaments to win. It's when you play against all 11 players. And Des, of course, won the European top 12. In fact, funny enough, Dave, you and I were debating the date, weren't we? And I think we agreed it was about 1987 when Des won the European top 12. But yeah, no, I was very fortunate. I had the privilege to work with two of the greatest. The word legend is thrown around perhaps a little bit too much, but I would certainly consider those two as legends of the game.
And also, Don, what we were saying with Des's session and Nicky's session, and I even remember Don Parker playing a semi-final on live television, the English closed as well. But Jill at her prime and Des, they would have been regulars on BBC television, wasn't they? It wasn't like Sky Channel 23 at 3 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's very interesting, isn't it, to look back at table tennis? But certainly, in the 70s, 80s, it was a lot more popular on mainstream TV. So BBC, for example, would always feature the national championships, and it'd be a sort of an afternoon of table tennis. So the players in those days, got quite more publicity than the players did now. The difference now is you can watch table tennis on TV, but you have to go looking for it.
Yeah.
You have to know that it's on Eurosport. You have to know it's on Sky. And the table tennis fans will find it and they will watch it. But when it's on BBC on a Saturday afternoon, there'll be about 3-4 million people who just have the telly on. The families come, hey, look, table tennis is on. And all of a sudden, the players then sort of, I wouldn't say they became household names, but they became pretty well known. The Des Douglases, the Jills, and a few other players as well down in England. So I think table tennis now gets more coverage, but it doesn't get coverage on the big channels, basically.
Yeah.
Just on that Des one, just for a second, Dave, as well. I mean, I kind of listened, and it was great to listen to Des, and obviously fantastic career that he had. But when he was winning his top 12s and he won his 11, what was it, 10 out of 11 or 11 out of 12 or whatever the year before, and didn't win it. But the names he was reeling off at that time as well, it was a real pantheon of table tennis legends. It was the Grubers, it was the Appelgrens, it was Waldners, and fantastic just to think that someone in our midst, if you like, was there mixing it and beating those absolute legends of the game. So again, Secretan would be part of that mix as well. So and so humble with it as well, with Des as well. So humble and how he carried himself. So that was fantastic achievement. His top.
I mean, it's a really good point. So that was 1987. Des won the Europeans. In 1989, 2 years later, Sweden beat China in the final of the World Championships in Germany 5-0, and then dominated the next World Championships in Sheba, and then the next World Championships. Europe was the strongest continent in men's table tennis. And you name them, Ewan, the legends really: Waldner, Persson, Appelgren, Lind, who was a great player as well, won a bronze medal at the first Olympic Games that table tennis was in Seoul, and other players as well, Carlsen, von Scheele, who won world titles. It's incredible that a country with 10 million people could produce players of that ilk and be the best in the world. But also, you mentioned other names, Ewan, as well. We had Roscoff, we had the two the Yugoslavia as it was at that point in time, and then Gatien and Save. Players who got to the final of the World Championships. Europe was really strong, and Des won the top 12. And you good knowledge, Ewan, because the year later he played it. Sorry, the year before he played in Sweden, and it's never happened before or since. And he played Voldner the last game, the 11th game of the tournament, and both were on 10-0. Both had won 10, lost none, and they played each other. And Voldner beat him, and Des finished second. And when Des actually won it, he won it with 8 wins and 3 defeats. It all depends who beats who over the period of 4 days. And ironically, Des's best record was 10-1. And unfortunately for him, Voldner just was unplayable that weekend and won 11-0. So, and I guess I know I'm spending a bit of time on Des, but just to say, I then became the coach of the England team. And I strongly believe that you need your best players coming to all your training sessions. And not only was Des the first one to arrive, he stayed to the end. He'd come back from Germany for training sessions. He'd practice, for 4 or 5 hours. And then when I said, that's it, end of the day, Des would want to practice even more. Can I stay and practice a bit more, Don? And that sort of attitude was unbelievable. And it didn't matter when he went on the table, whoever he was playing, if I put him on against one of the juniors, he gave it 100%. Yeah. I mean, he was such a great example. And for me as a coach, you're trying to instill that discipline. I didn't have to, because everybody looks at the best player, Des, and they see that attitude. And, whenever Des was selected to play for England, he was there. It didn't matter what tournament, where it was, he was there. He was just the perfect player for me to actually have as the number 1 player. And funnily enough, I went on a Zoom call last week, a load of players from London get together, Joey Kennedy, a name some of you may recall. And when I joined, there was about 14 faces looking at me, and there was a grinning Des. So I actually paid tribute to Des in front of, because he was just a wonderful example. Went to Germany when he was 22. It's quite interesting. A lot of people think he went earlier. He was 22 years of age before. He worked on the buses in Birmingham, and then decided he was going to give it a go as a full-time pro when he was 22 and went to Germany. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah.
Okay, just before, I'm going to hand over to you for session 2. And again, I just want to go back to that golden era when table tennis was on television, on grandstand. What was it like for Jill and Des playing live on grandstand when it wasn't a regular feature for them? And the reason I'm asking you, Don, is because when you beat Mark Mitchell in the quarterfinal, you played Des in the semis, and that was live on television, wasn't it?
Yeah. I had a bit of hair then. I made sure I looked good. I combed my hair before I went. I actually won the first game against Des then. He didn't like Dunlop Super Bowls. You probably played with those as well. They were like little rockets, weren't they? They weren't the sort of traditional plastic ball. It was celluloid. And they went that little bit harder. So for little old me was trying to topspin, all of a sudden I got a bit more pace on the ball. I couldn't really worry Des, but I took a game off him. So I was quite pleased with that. And I'll tell you something else about Des and Jill. When they were on TV or when they were playing in front of a big crowd, all they ever said to me when I tried to talk, I thought, well, I'll try and calm you, was, don't worry, I'm just going to do my best. And that was the philosophy. You can have all these complex theories about, sort of psychological and taking them into zones. But all they ever said to me, Don, don't worry, I'm just going to do my best. And that was the philosophy. It didn't matter whether there was, Jill and Des will have played in front of 20,000 spectators in China. They'll have played on television numerous times. But the philosophy was, I'm just going to do the best I can. And it's a very simple message, but I think it's a really important one for any youngsters that happen to be listening. When you go on the table, just do your best. You got to behave yourself, of course you do, but you just got to do your best. If you win, you win. If you lose, you lose. You learn from losing, and next time you play that person, you do your best again. Simple but effective.
Yeah.
Good. Right. Well, that covers both Des and Jill very nicely. Thank you very much for that, Don. Of all the 29 sessions we've had, the most popular one we've had, where I think we had about 800 people have actually clicked on, was our friends and rivals, and the chemistry between Ewan and Ian, and it was just absolutely fantastic. It just caught the imagination of everybody. Ewan, how did you find it? Yeah, that was your very first Zoom session as well, wasn't it?
It was. I think I just downloaded the app that day as well, so complete novice to Zoom. But and actually it was quite nice, kind of trip down memory lane, wasn't it? In terms of just catching up with Ian and a bit of chat beforehand. I think I think looking back, I think we were lucky in terms of our circumstance, both being kind of in the Glasgow area, and at that time Glasgow was such a dominant force in Scottish table tennis. I talked about turning up to Bellahouston Sports Centre and you'd have 9 out of the top 10 players in Scotland all there practicing, all in tables next to each other, and not only did you have that great kind of practice environment, but you had the competitive kind of rivalries as well. Watching John Bro and Richard Joe playing in the next table, or Dave McElroy and Ian McLean playing 2 down, and so it was a great kind of environment for spurring you on and to achieve better things. And also we had the wise old sage Andy Fleming, who again in Scottish table tennis circles, a legendary coaching figure, and not just on the table, but off the table as well, in terms of the kind of paternal or grandfatherly type advice he would give, his players, so freely. So we were, very, very fortunate of where we were and the time that we were, involved in that Glasgow scene. I think what also made, Ian and I particularly close was that we broke into the national team at the same time. And again, this kind of coincided with your kind of appearance in Scotland, really, Dave, as well. So we were sharing a lot of these same experiences, for the first time together, if you like. And that always makes it a little bit easier if you've got this shared experience going on with, both a friend and a rival. And also, I think, I think what came through so clearly was, Ian and myself, we were never full-time players, but we're all kind of both desperately committed and serious part-time players. And certainly the commitment the likes of Ian Stokes was putting into his play, into his preparation, getting up at 3 a.m, delivering his fruit and veg out to the restaurants in Glasgow, and then we would play in the afternoon for a few hours. So I think it was a real strong message for anybody listening in terms of the type of commitment and dedication needed, and the fact that you can improve, you can be a successful player nationally and also to an extent internationally, even if you're not a professional player. If you put yourself forward and prepare as well as you can, then you can still achieve good things. And I think the fact that we both were kind of growing up together and practicing together and learning together, I think always makes it that little bit easier compared to just having to do it on your own all the time.
Ewan, can I just interject just a point you just made there, just to cover off a lot of the sessions that we've had was the commitment. And I think it's fascinating just to go through some of the guests that we had and the commitment they've done to table tennis, where when you talked about Craig Howison was one, you talked about Ian doing his fruit and veg. Craig talked about studying in Edinburgh, travelling through to Glasgow every day from university to train until 10 o'clock at night, and then doing exactly the same thing the next day again. Every person, I think, of a player shown that commitment. We obviously will touch on it later about our players that have gone abroad, but even thinking the university years one that we've done, where Alicia talked about a story of being at university and travelling across Poland to play in university matches, and her attitude towards table tennis was a little bit more laid back, I think. However, our commitment to playing for a team, and I think that was just the apparent of all these sessions we've done, is for such a, we don't think of table tennis because we're involved in it as a minority sport, because we love it, but it is a minority sport for the rest of the country. But the commitment of all these players for no pay, for limited prize money, is just amazing. I just wanted to interject there because I just thought it was an important point of all these sessions of the actual commitment to playing table tennis.
Yeah, and I think it was Colin Wilson that said, wasn't it, that we play it because we love it, and fundamentally that's so key, and that's what underpins everything that we do. We do it because we love it. We certainly weren't doing it to be millionaires or anything like that. So, and I think also what you saw, whether it was Ryan Jenkins talking about it, as you said, or whether it's Craig Howison or Ian Stokes, is they all kind of took responsibility for their own development as well. They weren't there waiting to have it handed on a plate to them. They all showed that commitment, that willingness to push themselves to go and seek out the practice that they needed to do to make them better. And I think that was also a very strong kind of message that came through a number of these sessions. Take responsibility for your own development.
Yeah. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to go off key a bit. I'm going to bring the girls in. Tell us about. Are you ready? Who's going to start? Amelia or Holly? Our first two girls we had were Alice. Well, no, obviously we had Jill, but the next two girls we had was Alison and Maria. Do you want to tell me how you felt about that? Who's going to go first, Amelia or Holly?
About Charlotte and Maria.
Oh, it was Charlotte. It was indeed. Yeah, Charlotte. Yeah, well done. Yeah.
So they were a bit younger, so I think they kind of appealed more to the younger age groups because you can see kind of the career steps that they've taken recently in a slightly different environment to a lot of the older players. So I think it was interesting seeing how Maria kind of balanced that university life with table tennis club. She went to Nottingham and now she's continuing going to uni to get another degree, I believe. So I think that was really interesting, being able to see how people have managed to balance that and be a national champion at the same time. I think that was really interesting. And yeah, Charlotte Carey obviously travelled over to Sweden to play, and she's travelled around the European countries. I think seeing how that has benefited her was pretty cool too.
And Holly, your reflections on when we started to have the younger girls on board?
I think it was pretty good to see like the difference in both of their not their aspects in table tennis, but how it contributes to their life, with obviously Maria at uni and then Charlotte playing well now in Spain and stuff. It just shows like the difference that they both have, but they're still getting the same opportunities and the same like wins out of how they're doing it.
Yeah.
And
one of the things that Charlotte said when she said if she was playing a top player and somebody's got to beat that top player, and she always had the attitude, why not me? I thought that was one of the things that came out of that. So it might have been her turn to beat the top player, and she was ready for that. I thought that was a little gem on that particular week. Anything else, boys, to add with Charlotte and Maria?
So on the Maria one, and it sounded a really impressive setup at Nottingham Uni as well. We covered it a little bit. Obviously, Maria covered it in detail in her session, and we touched on it a little bit in the university years. But nonetheless, that enviable position they had in Nottingham of being a top-notch university, but actually a fantastic coaching setup there as well. Very kind of professional approach in terms of having a full-time coach there. Very strong players to play with. So it sounded, that ideal balance. If you were going to try and mix university and sport, it sounded like Nottingham had it absolutely bang on and was a model there for others to aim for, if you like.
My observation of, especially when the younger players talked about it, and actually, again, it's a common theme throughout all of our guests, was the pain when they talked about their losses. So if you remember Charlotte talking about some of her losses, where those are the ones that they remember. And obviously you, and I think as well, probably from your career, you remember the losses more than the victories to some extent. And I think that was a good theme of all our guests. But I think it really came across with Maria and Charlotte, and even actually talking about Alison Bro as well, trying to remember their victories. But it was actually easier for them to remember where they've had a hard time in a hard match. I thought that was quite interesting. I suppose that's the same across any sport. You remember maybe the ones that didn't go as well as the ones that did.
Just going back to Maria, Dave, probably the most successful club in England for producing female players is Kingfisher in Reading, which I know you were associated with, Dave, when you were living in Newbury and working for English Table Tennis Association, as it was at the time. The likes of Mandy Sainsbury, Mandy Smith, as she was, Alison Gordon, Karen Witt, and a whole host of other top England players. So she had a great club structure. And then, as Ewan explained and the ladies explained, Nottingham University is a great place to be if you to pursue your academic career and pursue your table tennis, which I think is something table tennis needs to offer youngsters now, the opportunity to do a degree and at the same time, pursue their table tennis. And Nottingham certainly one of the universities that produces that. Charlotte Carey, of course, seems to have gone a little bit more down the full-time player. Jill, my wife Jill, we've already spoken about, and Charlotte are actually related, funnily enough, albeit a slightly distant relationship. But Jill's mother is from Blaina in the Welsh Valleys, and that's where Charlotte's from. So every tournament Jill and I are at, we'll always sit with Charlotte's mum and dad, who follow her everywhere, who again Jill's sort of related to. And so it's great to see Charlotte doing so well. She has a big game, doesn't she? She is capable of beating big players. I think it's just finding that little bit of consistency, and she could become, one of Europe's top players. So it seems to be still improving to me. So, fingers crossed that, both the young ladies, Maria and Charlotte, have a great season next season.
Yeah. And also it's important that they make good choices. Yeah, it's important to make good choices, go to the right tournaments, play the right players. And sometimes they haven't done. But I think the way Charlotte's started off after lockdown has been sensational, absolutely sensational. Look, we're talking about remembering the losses. I wonder whether Ewan remembers the USA Open final. Final USA Open, probably a couple of thousand people watching because it was on the show courts. Absolutely no problem at all. 2017 up in the third end. The ball went up in the air, came down with snow. We had to wait for 10 minutes for it to bounce. And Ewan managed to hit it off. And he managed to lose the next 2 points. Anyway, do you remember that one, Ewan?
Oh, yeah. And I just when Mark talked about kind of remembering your losses, I think generally I've been pretty good at kind of processing kind of the losses and kind of putting to the back of the mind and moving on. But that one definitely stung. Stung for the next kind of 20 years.
Who was the opponent, Ewan?
So it was an American guy. It was a guy called Todd Swears.
Yeah, I know Todd Swears. Yeah.
So he was kind of, I think he was unranked or something. I mean, he came through kind of his side of the draw, fantastically well, had a bunch of good wins. And I actually knew Todd when I was about 17. I went to the Butterfly Dojo in Tokyo for a month and trained out there. And Todd was actually there with a couple of other Americans at the same time. So I actually knew Todd pretty well. And as it was, and it was somebody that I actually at that time I could beat, but he had improved and I had a great tournament and came through his side of the draw and oh bloody hell, that was a sore one.
just to make it worse, and he was never in the lead in all three. He was never in the lead until that. Until match point. I mean, that's sometimes how it goes. Sometimes.
Yeah. I'll stick up for you because you wouldn't have been the success that you had if you couldn't put your losses to the back of your mind. I think it's reflecting on it.
So many of them.
Yeah. When the career is finished, I think it's easier to reflect. But I don't think a top player gets success if they harp on about or holds them back about in their current career of losing a game because they can't move on.
I mean,
did his dad play, Ewan?
Say again?
Was his dad one of the selectors for the US team? And his dad was a pretty good player.
I don't know, John. I can't remember. I don't know.
I think I used to play against his dad, and his dad wasn't bad. We used to play in the US team championships. And we'd take a GB team over.
Yeah.
And that always used to be. And China would always send a team, but the first few rounds were just fun rounds. Yeah. And so we had a strong team to Great Britain. It was Des, I think it was Alan Cook and maybe Andrew Eden. It was sort of, pretty good team. And we played the Blues Brothers. I saw the draw, and we had the Blues Brothers in the first round. And it was just good fun. Typical American tournament, 100 tables, chaos. But then when you got to the last 16, you played China seconds, Lupulescu and Primorac would be there, Yugoslavia. So it was worth going for those good games. And you were guaranteed loads of games. So I put myself in. I thought, for a bit of fun, the coach, I'll play. And the Blues Brothers turned out to be a very good team. But they played with the bowler hats on, the sunglasses. And sorry, I'm telling you this story, but I think Todd's dad played in that team. He was one of the Blues Brothers. So I think I beat him, but as I say, he had a bowler hat and sunglasses.
I think one of the reasons why I like to remind Ewing about that, because there's very few games he lost it, dues, or 20 all. If ever Ewing got to 19 all or 20 all, I always fancied he was going to win, and he nearly always did. So normally, if he got beaten, it was well beaten. Whether it was a Chinese player or the Chinese Spanish player, your favourite player. But no, I mean, there were very, very few times that if it got to 20 all, I was pretty calm. I was pretty calm at the USA Open. So it just shows you complacency is not a good thing. Right. What I'd like to do now is lump... on about week 4 and 5, we had 2 players from a similar vintage, and I'm going to let Mark take. Keep wanting to call you Matthew, Mark, because it's not Matthew's name. We had 2 players from a similar vintage. Actually, they were both rivals of Ewing in more or less successive weeks. We had Ryan Jenkins and Gavin Rumgay, and so what were your reflections of those 2 sessions, Mark?
So Ryan was my first one of joining the group, as we call ourselves now. And I found it fascinating hearing from Ryan for 2 aspects. One, from the player. I think Ryan, hearing from him and knowing about him, obviously he played in a slightly older era for me of growing up. But I think with Ryan, went to Germany, and I think it was cut a bit short from what maybe his career was. I think Ryan could have maybe excelled even higher into the top 100 in the world, possibly. But it was interesting to get his reflection on that. Certainly on the UK scene, in the Grand Prix circuit, I think Ryan's success was brilliant. And then leading and being part of a Wales team, for being such a small country, of leading a team with Adam Robertson coming through, and even talking about his paternal coach with Alan Griffiths as well was fascinating. But then the next bit, Ryan, was the coaching aspect, and what it led on, obviously, being the national coach of Wales. And I thought it really got me hooked, and obviously why I've been involved in these sessions week in. I was, after about half an hour with Ryan, listening to him, I was definitely hooked in. But yeah, I thought just Ryan's reflection on table tennis of being that, because being professional was brilliant to listen to. And then you then move on to that similar intensity of a person we know well as Gavin, where obviously I know Gavin very, very well, and I touch upon him quite a lot in every session to some extent, because I've been sort of involved in his career. But it was just obviously good to hear from Gavin's reflection of where growing up in Scotland and then moving to London, and then times at Bristol, and then going to Sweden to learn, and actually taking that actual ownership of his career, where without that support possibly from Scotland, because the funding's not been there, and you've obviously been through that for years as well and had to make sacrifices. But I just thought the 2 of them together, of that age group, and they're battling together. I think you could go on YouTube right now and find many games between Gavin and Ryan, and the intensity was brilliant. So yeah, I just think as a modern day British player, it was 2 absolute fantastic sessions.
Can I hand over to the girls here? Because obviously you've been part of Gavin's latter championships, Scottish Close and various other things. Have you sort of been inspired by Gavin, Holly and Amelia, or is it a benchmark or have you been concentrating more on the girls of Gillian or Linda Floors? Or
I think growing up, I've kind of looked at both. Obviously, I looked at the woman in the women's game because that's who you aspire to be. But I think seeing Gavin when I was growing up and watching how he kind of took ownership of his own kind of training and he made his own way through table tennis, obviously with the support of a lot of people, but he always seemed like quite a standalone character. I think that was quite something I looked up to and something I learned from him, is that you need to go out and get it yourself in table tennis. You can't just be like handed things, and he's done extremely well because of that.
And Holly?
I think as well the passion he has for it, like especially being having his own like kind of brand company to do with like other like badminton and stuff. It just shows his true passion for sport as well as table tennis, and that he really does want to do well. He wants to do well for like the team and himself, and he really goes out his way to make it happen for himself.
If I could just ask the girls, if you don't mind, guys, who was your first national senior ladies champion? Was it Rebecca, or does your own table tennis career go before Rebecca? So, because obviously Rebecca's won it. Is it 4 times now, I think, the nationals? This is Rebecca Plaistow, Don.
Right.
I think maybe Linda won it.
Yeah, Linda Flores, yeah.
I think maybe towards the end of before she kind of.
Yeah, and she's from the Shetland.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Just on the Gavin one there, just for a second, Dave. I think Gavin, a fantastic sportsman. I think one of the things we touched on when it was Gavin's session was the range of different sports he played nationally at, and even perhaps even internationally in terms of badminton, tennis, and table tennis. So fantastic sportsman. But I think what's really set Gavin aside, and I guess made him the record holder now in terms of Scottish titles, that longevity he's had is because of his physical fitness. He's kept himself incredibly good shape. There's not a pick of fat on him. He's really, he's very quick, and we all have kind of deficiencies in our game, but Gavin's speed and his agility and his ability to use his fitness and speed to kind of work round any kind of shortcomings in the game. I think it's been really interesting to watch over the years, and I say particularly when I compare him to kind of say myself or kind of others, that his ability to look after himself and his body so much better than any of us previously in Scotland, I think was probably what stands him out a little bit.
I just share a quick story about Gavin as a natural sportsman. I don't think I shared it in the session. If it not, it was months ago. But we were playing Junior British League at the Potters Village, which obviously is known for its bowls. And it was a Friday night before we were playing on Saturday. We decided to go in the bowl practice lawn bowls. Gavin's never thrown a bowl in his life before, and I'm showing him the bias of how you do it, because my granny played bowls, so she showed me, so I had to show Gavin. And then the first bowl that he ever threw, he trailed the jack. So in those bowls, it's a perfect bowl, perfect speed, took the jack away, and there was a group of like old ladies and men sitting watching it, clapped him. And that's an example of Gavin as a natural sportsman, is he took his hand to anything and naturally picked it up and very quickly. And that's the thing about table tennis. Gavin started playing table tennis as a minor, and within 6 months, I think, was ranked #1. It's just that natural ability to pick things up, and that's what I'll always take away. And being with him all these years, he's just absolutely, how can I do it, and how can I do it better than anyone else?
Yeah. And also, Mark, as Ewing touched on, he has stayed incredibly fit. And I think it would be wrong to judge Gavin on his age, to say, oh, well, we won't consider him for major events because of his age, because he is incredibly fit. He puts in a good warm-up, a good cool-down. He looks after himself. Again, he's not always made the best choices in life, in table tennis, but he's a top player. He's got years ahead of him. I think he still should... still capable of an upset. I really believe that. Don, you
Dave, just to say, I've commentated with Gavin a few times, and he was excellent. His reading of the game, his tactical awareness. It was a pleasure for me to sit next to him and listen to what he had to say. So I've not watched an enormous amount of Gavin play. But yeah, as I say, I had the privilege of working with him. And Ryan, I know a little bit better. And I'm delighted to say now that Ryan's actually doing some work for Table Tennis England. As one of the regional national coaches looking after table tennis in England now have a Hopes age group, and Aspire, and a junior squad. And Ryan is working sort of with the Hopes, Aspire, the 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, where obviously he'll be a tremendous influence on them. So,
and Ryan's session was really kind of information rich as well. I mean, he, all these experiences absorbed, from, as I said, from his playing career, from being abroad, from internationals, from his coaching time. And I think even one of the things that he kind of dwelt on a little bit during his session was about even just the kind of the domestic tournaments and as you know, that there can be so many distractions going on, so many people wanting to come and speak to the best player, or asking how he's going to do today and is he going to win, and actually how yes, he could kind of engage with people, but he knew when to engage, but then also when to kind of step back and start preparing for his next game and take himself away into kind of his concentration zone and it seemed a very good lesson. And if I think back to my time playing kind of Scottish Championships and stuff, it was always, I thought it was always important to make sure you found out when was the next match going to be on, when were you next going to be on, and then start to work back from that in terms of, okay, by this time I need to be kind of taking myself away. And everybody has their own kind of ways of preparing for matches, but generally, taking yourself away and doing whatever feels natural and just trying to get rid of those distractions at the right time. And so I thought Ryan talked about that, really well in terms of all the success at the Grand Prix events. And so he was good. And also is kind of insistence that just make sure you keep trying to add to your game. Don't settle for just the status quo. Always think about how can I get a slightly better serve here, or how can I get a bit more power on my backhand. And again, that seemed a very good kind of mantra. Keep trying to add to your game. Don't settle for status quo.
Ewan, it's also a good point that was obviously raised, what you said there about what you do to prepare for a game. That's one of the questions that came up throughout the year from a younger guest was, how do you prepare for a big match, or how do you get ready, or how do you get in the mindset? And I think the obvious thing that came from it was everybody did something different, but they had their own way. And I think that was what was apparent from every top player we've interviewed, was that they would find their way and it was their formula and that's what they would stick to. And the key is they found it and that was their routine. So I think for any young player, and especially for Holly and Amelia still playing, is it's before a big match, it's what works for you. You don't have to do what Gavin Runge does or what Ryan Jenkins does or Maria Sapsinas. You have to find what suits you.
Yeah, I mean, it's. We mentioned the USA Open. I promise I won't mention it again, Ewan. But equally, our table tennis, it can balance on very fine margins. I mean, if we go back to the English Open, the biggest tournament we have in Britain, and it used to be bigger. I'm sure Dom would agree. It tended to get watered down in latter years. And Ewan and I went down to that, and sometimes you can probably watch Jill Parker or Des Douglas playing in front of 20,000 people and think this is what this is all about. But probably what Jill and Des had to do was get up at 9 o'clock and win that match in front of no people. Now, Ewan I took Ewan down to the English Open, and he had to play Ryan Jenkins at 9 o'clock in the morning, his very first match. Now, if he loses it, that's him out the tournament. And it got to 19 all in the third, and I thought it was in the bag. And I was right that time. But not only that, Ewan won his group, won his next match, and then he became the last surviving British player, and he played against Marmarak and beat him. So a very fine margin, 19 all, 9 o'clock, we could have been on we could have been back. heading towards East Kilbride at 11 o'clock that morning. So, I mean, it is on, isn't it? Very fine margins.
Oh, it is, yeah. And it's very interesting because I was massively, you know, about if you played a game at whatever time, you got up, you had your breakfast, you had time, then you went down there, you practiced for so long, everything that we've actually been saying. And it's interesting that there is a slight downside of that. Slight downside is that you can, if that then gets disturbed for whatever reason, that you can't get on a table or there is a power cut or something goes wrong, that then some players, and I'm guilty of this, I was guilty of this as a coach, you know, you have to be able to adapt as well at the same time. And I told the story going back to my first session when the Euro Asia tournament, and I ended up through an ear infection to the Swedish coach, going from Singapore to Kota Kinabalu with Voldner, Appelgren and Grubber was the team I was looking after. And we got all sorts of problems getting to Singapore. 3 days it took us. And then we had to spend one night in Singapore. And then I went out with these three. But these three boys hadn't hit a ball for 4 days. And the next minute, Voldner and Appelgren disappear and they're relaxing in the swimming pool at the hotel. I can't find them. And so we're now going on against Yunam Q, who was the Olympic champion, Zhang Jiliang, who was the world champion, and a player I'm sure you remember, Teng Yi, who was the young boy, the wonder boy they called him when he won the English Open. So I thought this is going to be a nightmare. But honestly, Voldner and Appelgren weren't worried at all. And, you know, and we hammered this team in front of a massive crowd. And there's me thinking, you know, and it just taught me that you've got to have those regimes in place if you're a player, and you've got to, you know, prepare as you would textbook style, but just be prepared. You don't know what's going to happen. Your car breaks down on the way from the hotel to the venue or whatever. And then it's just a case of staying calm, and then just and going back to what I said earlier about doing your best. And that's what I sort of learned from Voldner and Appelgren in particular. Every plane we got on this trip, they were the last two. I thought they've missed the plane again, you know, and they've come on. They've been playing cards in the departure lounge, oblivious to the fact that the plane was loading up. But eventually the stewards, you know, the people who work for the airline had find them, but just completely chilled, completely relaxed, nothing fazed them. And it's fascinating to see that as well, that sort of more laid back approach. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one.
It is. On that one then, Don, did that change your approach then thereafter? I mean, did that alter your thinking when you were with the English team, or did you kind of stick to what you knew?
I think what I tried to do, it's probably, you might even be listening to us now, but one of the players who was really sort of, you know, prepared so thoroughly, so professionally was Alan Cook. Yeah. Who, of course, was a great player, Commonwealth champion 2 or 3 times or whatever, great player, and a total professional. And Alan got a little bit phased if it didn't quite go right. Yeah. So we just tried to be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more chilled, you know, and adapt accordingly. So it's not ideal, is it? As you would know, and you've got everything down to a T. Even now, what music you listen to it, when you listen to that music, when you turn it off, and etc. When you stop talking to your friends, when you go away, as you were describing, Ryan, there. And sometimes, with the best will in the world, it does go slightly wrong. So Cookie for me was one of the most professional players that I ever worked with. But Cookie could get a little bit, you know, sort of edgy if something broke that routine. So yeah, we tried to work around it and just, you know, talk about things that could happen and what we'd do if they did. But it's not ideal, but it's something, as you know, you've got to adapt to. Sure. That was, and then on that trip, we went to Bangkok and we played a knockout tournament, the best 8 European players, the best 8 Asian players. And Des ended up in the quarterfinal against Pearson. And we're in this hall in Bangkok, massive ceiling, and the light came loose and hurtled to the ground and missed Des by a meter. Had it hit Des, it would have killed him. So Des looks at me. I'm sitting back because it's 2 players in the European team. We just let them play. But I jumped up and went over to Des. Des wouldn't carry on. Carry on. No. So Des pulled out, and Pearson says, well, I don't want to win like this. I said, well, one of you's going to. And that was the trip. I don't know if you remember, Ewan, that we went to Hong Kong to play the final match. And that's when Voldy got the bottle. He got the scar that he had on his face was that night. He you know, the tour was over. We played in Hong Kong, and then we're all going home the next day. And Volner went out with a few of the players, ended up in a nightclub. I suspect he flashed his money, and somebody fancied his money, and they put a bottle just straight over his head and cut him here.
That's right.
The thing I remember about that is when I met him before he'd had the stitches, and his socks were just covered in blood. You know, they were soaking him. So he said it was a really bad cut. And the debate was, do we have it seen to here? Will he have a bad scar if he has it done in Hong Kong? So it's amazing the things you have to resolve when you're a coach. Luckily, I wasn't making the call. Glenn Hoos, the Swedish coach, was there. But yeah, that was an event.
I remember
for a variety of reasons.
Oh,
speaking about hospitals, I remember in between the team event and the individual event, one of my players spent nearly 2 days in the hospital. Relaxing, eating grapes while his teammates were slogging away. And it's amazing because he played in the team event. You basically collapsed, didn't you? But the 2 days in hospital, he came back and he was the fittest player there. And you went to win your group easily and had a good win, didn't you? Win your first match as well.
No. I think I kept trying to remember in the main draw. I can't remember. Joe Eng, I think it was a beat.
Yeah,
on this, Don, you know, it was very serious. I can assure you.
It was the first casualty of the World Championship.
How do you, when you take players to hospital, how, and especially if you don't speak Chinese? I mean, I don't even speak English, but especially if you don't speak Chinese, is how can you let the hospital know not to give them something that's a banned substance? You know, I was trying to get that message to say he's a sportsman, and you know, if you give him something and he gets pulled up on a drugs test, I don't know whether you've experienced that. That was the second time I'd experienced that. Have you ever had that done?
Yeah, but I've always managed, I guess, you know, no, I've not had that situation. I've always had an interpreter with me, somebody who could actually, you know, it's not happened a lot. Where were you for this? Was this the Worlds in China?
Yeah, Tianjin. Yeah.
Tianjin,
yeah, 95.
Oh, Tianjin 85, yeah. Kongling Hui, 95.
95, because we just come from Singapore, hadn't we? So we played the Commonwealth Champs in Singapore, and I think genuinely it was dehydration. I think it, you know, we're playing in the badminton hall.
No air conditioning.
It was dreadful, you know. But we ended up we had a pretty good tournament, didn't we? The Commonwealth Championships. We played pretty well.
2 points off a medal.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We just lost.
It was 1917 up against, but it was an Mbaba. Was it the Indian number one? 1917 up in the third. Yeah. And he hit an absolutely fantastic forehand. So I thought 2017, and Babu got his back to it, 1918, and we lost that, but that would have put us in the medal position. Then we beat Malaysia, didn't we, the next match, and finished one. And then obviously really tough matches, straight off to China, you know, playing the next day, tough team event. And
there was tough decisions there. I don't know what you think, Ewan. Do you think it was advantageous for you to play in Singapore? Or, you know, we from an England point of view, the players are all keen to play in the Commonwealth Championships and obviously the Commonwealth Games. But somehow the Commonwealth Championships for me always had a special place. You know, they're just wonderful events. I think it's the Commonwealth family that sells it. But when it was the Worlds, and I'd never say we were strongly in contention at the Worlds, but we were, you know, potentially top 10 and on a good tournament, potentially quarterfinalists, you know, with Des, Prino, Cookie, Chen Xinhua, you know. We made decisions about not doing 2 tournaments back to back. And I guess this is an example, you know, it didn't quite work because, as you say, Singapore was tough, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, and I guess for us in Scotland, the Commonwealth always has an increased prominence, doesn't it? In terms of, you know, it is a kind of major international event. Obviously, at the Commonwealth Games, it's our chance to represent kind of Scotland at one of these big multinational events. So Commonwealth was kind of always something that we're going to, you know, I was keen to make sure that I did play in. But, you know, looking back, it was, you know, back to back. That was 3 weeks, 4 weeks of play. So it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to give your best over that kind of length of time. So in that sense, bizarrely, maybe it was kind of fortunate I had that almost the break during the team event at the Worlds, and then actually came back and played great in the singles. I had a really good run in the singles.
Yeah, interesting.
Super tough.
I mean, if we go back to Singapore, it will be, Ian played absolutely awful, 1-2 against Malaysia, because that's the way Ian was. But you'd beaten Peter Jackson, you'd beaten Bavarian, you'd beaten all the number ones, hadn't you?
Yeah, and I remember we played England, and I'm trying to remember. I think I maybe beat Brad. Brad, and then had three setter with Prino. So I was definitely kind of playing well at that tournament once we kind of got over the initial kind of environmental shock.
Yeah. Okay. Right. We better move on. I'm just going to make sure we cover these three: Alison Brough, Martin Perry, Johnny Cowan. I want to touch briefly on Alison, because one of the things Don mentioned was Kingfisher and the success of the players. One of the things Alison mentioned, that obviously she had a lot of coaches helped her. Reg Hart was the one who got her playing, a very technical coach who was an engineer, and he had engineering standards when he coached. But then he passed it to Peter Charters. Now, Peter's one of those coaches who is associated with a number of top players. Karen, Wick, Mandy, you can name them all. And probably one of Pete's qualities that he doesn't realise, players feel guilty if they're not practicing, if he's about. Now, Andy Fleming had that as well. I remember, and like you was talking about Andy Fleming in Glasgow, I remember sitting having a cup of coffee in Glasgow. I did go once. And then in walked Andy, and everybody got up and went to the table tennis hall without being told. And Pete Charters has got that presence as well. He'd say to the lads, go down to the Kingfisher and play. And they would, and they've both, I feel, had got that similar. Can you teach that, Don, do you think?
Well, it's a great point, isn't it? Do you need to be a top player to be a good coach? Peter Charters wasn't a top player, far from it. Yeah. I think if you're a top player and you go into a coaching hall, you have the respect of the players, but you can lose that in half an hour if your sessions are shambles and you're badly organised. So I think the players respect a coach who's committed. If you know that coach wants you to win just as much as you want to win, for me that means so much. And Pete Charters, whenever he was in the coaching hall, whenever he was with any player, he just wanted the best for them, and I'm sure the players sensed it. I know Andy a little bit, Andy Fleming, but I never worked obviously close by his side. But if he had that same ability, that's great. And I think you earn that. You earn that respect by setting the standards and sticking to those standards yourself.
And also, if we come back to Andy Fleming, and I think this is really important as a coach as well. And if you read the book, The Coach, by Ralph Saybook, he said the true coach, he'll follow the players' education, their social standing, what they do off court. And Ewing was in Calamity Jane. You had a lead part. Was he Wild Bill Hiccup?
Yeah, in my school show. I was kind of final year of secondary school.
Hiccup.
That's right. That's right.
And Andy came to see you, didn't he?
That's right.
Came to watch the show. On a serious note, I think that's just a lovely touch. Girls, I've not brought you in for a while. Alison Brough, how did you find Alison? Amelia, you go first.
That was quite a while ago. I think Alison, was she on with someone?
No, Alison was on by herself, I think.
Yeah. Remember, you might not remember. Ollie, did you remember Alison being on?
Very vaguely, but I do remember that she really highlighted that it's really useful to play with the boys as well as play with the girls. and she really highlighted that that's really important, especially from a coach's point of view. But other than
You
that,
saved
I
it,
don't
Holly.
actually
You saved
remember
it.
much.
That was the main thing from Alison. They were one of the good points.
But Alison had such a kind of an offensive game, didn't she? She was so two-winged, you know, big kind of backhand top spins and forehand top spins, and a very kind of modern and you know, not. I think she said herself it wasn't a kind of a typical kind of girls, you know, style in terms of really fast. She was much more spin based, and but yeah, no, she was you know, really good. And I remember she came up to Scotland and she really kind of helped the standard as well. You know, she was definitely in there mixing it with likes of myself, obviously John Bro and Ian Stokes. So she was a fantastic addition and you know, super knowledgeable and, you know, a real nice person and good ambassador. She was a good guest.
Yeah, and also she came up, did a lot of coaching, and was very instrumental in Mark's early career and Gavin's early career, wasn't she?
Yeah, no, she was. She's done a few sessions up in Perth with me, Gillian Edwards, obviously, but it was just intensity, and I think took our game to a different level. I think particularly for Gavin, that intensity really sort of came into his game, and that his forehand was always a bit tennisy. If that makes sense, because obviously he came from a tennis background, and it was quite a long stroke. And then working with Alison, we worked a lot over the summer. And then when we went into the next season, Gavin was very dynamic on that forehand, very early with the top spin, and so yeah, definitely made a difference there.
The Alison was also, because I worked with Alison quite a bit when I was the coach, was an incredible fighter, never gave up, and I think one of the best, what sticks in my mind, you know, really emotional moment. We're in Bolzano in northern Italy, and it was the Olympic qualification tournament, and 12 players from Europe qualified. She had to finish in the top 12, and she was playing Popova, who was, you know, one of the greats. Popova, European champion, top 10 in the world, from Russia, and she was something like, Alison will tell you, but she was about 20-14 down in the deciding game and won it. And that bought her a ticket for Barcelona. Barcelona. It's just she got a trip to the Barcelona Olympics. She's an Olympian on the back, in my opinion, of just an incredible fighting spirit. Fought for every point. You know, Popova. Anybody who's watched Popova, she gives you nothing. And Ali won all those 8 points to win the game. And an absolute pleasure to see her as an Olympian in Barcelona.
Don, I think it was one story she remembered. Yeah, sorry.
She spoke about that, yeah.
I think though it was like the one story I took from her about her career where she really struggled to recall. Wasn't that right, Dave? Of like matches, and sort of touched on it earlier as well. But she sort of talked but you actually gave us more detail than she did, Don. Obviously from a third party or another person looking in of actually the importance of that match. She downplayed it a little bit more.
Yeah.
One of the again, most interesting. Well, everybody was interested though. We had Johnny Cowan on again, another one of Ewing's friends and rivals. Johnny, when I spoke to Johnny, Johnny himself said I wasn't a world-class player, but every now and again, like a lot of players, they rose to a world-class level, maybe over one game, maybe over 3 games. And obviously they, you know, what makes a world top 10 player is they do it every game. And one of the things we spoke about was, Johnny had some very good wins. And unfortunately, his best win was against Ewing. When Ewing was clear favourite at the British Championships. But Johnny was always a nice guy, very pleasant. That's why he's doing so well as a commentator. But sometimes his kindness and his pleasantness of chatting to everybody, he'd walk in the hall, he'd say hello to Don's mum, and then he'd say hello to Eric, and he'd say, but the time he beat Ewing, he actually was quite late entering the hall, and he spoke to nobody. There was like a wall of silence surrounded him, and he went to his seat, and I thought, well, I've never seen him do this before. And he was extremely quiet, never shouted when he won the point. And I think that's the only time I've seen you lose to him, Ewing. I'm not saying you didn't, you know, your record against him. And Johnny himself said, you know, whether that was the only time he beat, but on that particular game, it was well worth his victory, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, and John, I think from that point on, I can't exactly remember. Maybe we split it thereafter. But Johnny, you know, from going from a position where I was always reasonably comfortable against Johnny, all of a sudden, you know, it was a real struggle. And I think particularly Styles as well. He was, you know, very strong backhand, so very good coming in and flicking, very strong kind of backhand kind of pickup, and somebody that was two winged and really kind of aggressive would definitely gave me a few more kind of struggles. I always like to have a little bit time when I served, if people were a little bit unsure and on receiving. But Johnny came in and was kind of really positive. So he always put me under pressure. And I think he talked a little bit about the influence of Colm Slevin as well in the team and his career and that kind of professional approach and that kind of positive attitude that Colm instilled into the Irish team as well. And so I think a lot of that kind of paid off in Johnny, and I think also kind of led to Johnny moving over to Germany and playing out there for a while, and kind of picking up good habits there. So I mean, I guess the influence of role models is, you know, there's probably most of the good players that exist have had role models, and certainly in the Irish setup, having the likes of Colm Slevin, you know, has been a fantastic role model for them. And I guess you look at Wales and you've got Alan Griffiths, you know, going back and the impact he had on so many of their players. So yeah, no, Johnny was it was really good to listen to him, and now obviously, you know, very, you know, evangelical almost about the kind of the changes going on within world table tennis and the, you know, the new kind of tournament structure that's being brought in, and the desires to kind of professionalize that whole approach and elevate the status of the game and the status of the players, and so, you know, it was really it was good to hear him speak, you know with great passion about that venture that he's on now.
No, you're absolutely right, Ian. I think it's one of my favourite. I think you can never not enjoy speaking to Johnny at any point, and I think that was a great session. But also, speaking from a table tennis, but you touched on it there, was we got great insight, more than anyone else would have done, of what was about to happen in the international table tennis. As soon as we were able to get playing again with the world table tennis, and we saw that in Macau with that tournament, with Johnny's commentary, with Dan Ives sort of during it. But yeah, it was just a great insight of what was about what the changes happening in world table tennis, and I think we're so lucky to actually have Johnny on and going over that with us.
I've obviously commentated with Johnny, but I commentated on him playing, and I think it was in Glasgow when we had a Commonwealth Championships in the build-up to the Commonwealth Games, sort of a test event, and I referred to his backhand. He was, and I called it the Belfast backhand, and Johnny never forgives me for that. So we always talk about the Belfast backhand, but I just think Johnny is a really impressive operator. You know, I've seen him MC, I've seen him, you know, sort of run the show, introduce the guests, obviously an outstanding commentator. I think the ITTF have got a great man in Johnny, and I think his enthusiasm, and you said it perfectly, but his enthusiasm for world table tennis, the changes that are happening in the game. I know there's a little bit of a watching brief at the moment from associations but whichever way we go, Johnny will lead the way. I'm sure of that. And I once, when the Worlds were in London, I was one of the commentators at the venue, and Johnny was as well. And this MC asked me to go in, and there's a lot of people there, you know, and I'd talk about the matches, and basically I'd say, and there's a great Danish player playing tonight, and all of a sudden there's a lot of people go berserk, you know, the Danish supporters who come in to watch Michael Mays. And Johnny's watching all this. And the next night he went into the arena, and it was, I think, the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and Ovtcharov was playing Marlong. I think that was the match. Yeah. And Johnny goes out there and he starts talking Chinese to the Chinese crowd, and they're going bananas at him. And then he finishes, you know, when he's Chinese. Then he starts talking German to the German crowd, and they start going bananas. I mean, he was just brilliant. He's just, you know, I'm glad I went before him because I wouldn't have wanted to follow Johnny Cowan. That's for sure. Great man.
Yeah.
Okay, that was you know, again, a lot of good feedback from that session. And again, then we had a current player. So I'm going to ask, again, either Holly or Amelia. We introduced Martin Perry. Who wants to go first, Amelia or Holly? Amelia, you normally go first.
Martin Perry. I didn't see all of that YouTube, but I think he's just a really inspirational guy to look up to, and he's worked so closely with Drumchapel over the years.
Yeah. Have you had to play him on the tournament circuit, Amelia, or on any of these banded events yet? Or
I don't think I have. I think I watched him play some really close games at the West of Scotland Open last year.
Yeah.
I think he might have played, I can't remember who, there was a really close match from him.
Oh, I know the match you're talking about, Amelia. Andrew Nimmo from Dundee.
Yeah.
That was an unbelievable match. Just to fit a bit of context to that match.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So I've only ever really seen him play a couple of times, but
yeah. And Holly, were you watching that session or?
I'm not sure if I was on it, but I do think Martin's an inspiration, especially like for me, it quite hits home as well with like my back and my diabetes. So he is a very big inspiration, I think, because he's achieved a lot and overcame a lot to be able to, with his big passion of table tennis.
Well said.
And again, just like we was talking about Andy Fleming and Peter Charters, and you know, a lot of times we've talked about Mark's dad, Eric. You know, people have made table tennis for what it is. Martin spoke very passionately about our chairman, Terry McLernan. He said that Terry dragged him into table tennis. He went to a multi-sports event at Inverclyde, and Terry spotted him and he said, "You're coming to Drumchapel." And he didn't like arguing with Terry, so he went to Drumchapel. and from then on, he's been a very dedicated, table tennis player and a role model. Wonderful speaker. Don, if ever you want an after-dinner speaker, get Martin Perry. He's brilliant. Honestly, he's absolutely brilliant. Right. And then I'm not saying I've got this in the right order, but we actually had a very interesting session with the umpires, because what I remembered loads of things about that session, but I mean, Stuart McGowan summed it up. He said, "It's the best seat in the house." You know, why umpire? It's the best seat in the house. And Roy Claxton said that he just wanted to see fair play. That's what, even though he puts his club first, he wanted to see fairness on the table, and that was one of the reasons why he took to umpiring. And who was the third umpire?
Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown.
That's it. And then Don Charlie was telling us the tale. He was umpiring in either Singapore or China, and certainly Asia. And there was like massive money being betted on the games. And, you know, and he was terrified of making a mistake just in case he was accused of being tapped. So, you know, some of the things you never think about, you know, what the umpires had to deal with. So it was a very interesting session. And what was lovely about all three of them, they was all very welcoming to any future umpires. They encouraged the kids to take up umpiring. They felt it was important, if it's only so they know the rules, because it's Don and I know. It's staggering. A lot of the top players don't know some of the basic rules, a bit like pro footballers. And so, and Stuart McGowan, who kind of led that session, and obviously is our president, he is very welcoming to young umpires, you know, takes them under his wing, and you know, it's a really happy setup. And I felt that was a session with a difference, but nevertheless a very important session.
Yeah, no, good session. It was a good session, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Any comments on the young girls? If I was to ask you all the rules, would you be confident of? If I was to ask you the expedite rule, would you know it? No. There we are.
I heard that there's the rule now that you're allowed to coach during the games. This is I'm so out of date now, to be honest. But talk to me. I can't remember who said that.
Don, one of the things we've talked about a lot in the 29 sessions, I mean, it's gone from coaching at the end of the game to coaching every point. And I was the referee at a recent tournament, and I had to tell a coach stroke parent, because what he was doing, he was sitting by the net so he could offer advice. And I said, look, you must go and sit over there. But the view that we've put across on these 29 sessions is that I would like to see more tournaments with no coaches, that they turn, not every tournament, but they go to a tournament like an assessment tournament. The coaches put them there, they play, and they're only allowed to speak to the coaches at the end of the game. And it's the only way players are going to learn to think for themselves. And also, as I'm sure Don will tell you, that the first time I captained England abroad was with Don in Germany, and we turned up at this tournament, as I say, 9 o'clock, airy place, no spectators, 6 players all on at the same time. Well, you can't coach. 4 of them haven't got a coach. So they have to know how to be self-sufficient. Don, can I have your take on that?
Yeah. No, Table Tennis England did it this year, and there was a lot of controversy. I was quite surprised by the reaction to it. For one tournament, once a year, to have no coaching, to me, makes sense, because the worst that will happen is it has no effect. It can't have zero effect. It can't be minus effect, but it could have a positive effect. It could make a few players suddenly start to think for themselves, as they have to do in between points as well. However, of course, this coaching, as Ewan has just said, where you can coach all the time, I've never experienced that as a player or as a coach. I'll be intrigued to see how excited some coaches do get. But yeah, no, I'm with you, Dev. Definitely with you.
Sorry, my take on it is sort of seeing a lot of, obviously being a selector and watching table tennis for the last couple of years and actually being involved in it in tournaments, was I think you have this is more of a theory, by the way, of young adolescents where moods change during a game. And I think people's personalities is that certain coaches, that it can really affect them, because they play a point. And I was bad for it. So I used to turn around and look for my dad in the hall. I'd be like, if I played a bad point, I'd look for him straight away. If I played a good point, I'd look for him straight away. And I think it's something that we get into, that we become too reliant on, it's your fault I missed that point. Stop looking at me, or stop, you're involved, you're too close. And I don't know, Holly, if your parents are watching, or Amelia, I don't know with your dad, about, do you have that opinion when you're having the parents in the hall? Do you find it a distraction sometimes with young players, or does it not bother you? And I don't know if your parents are close by, so but you've got a free forum to talk about.
No, I've always had a thing with my parents that they can't be in the hall, really. Unless it's like a big match at the end, they can come watch, I guess. But I just don't like, I just like them to keep away. So like when you go into the car, when you leave a tournament, I like to not dwell on it too much. And if they've watched it, they'll have comments and things like that. I like just have that aside, because I had a coach, so Tom Hook, who's been a bit in and out recently, so I don't really have a coach at the moment, but he was always very heavily involved. And I think I would go session with him and we'd look over it, and I just quite liked having that separation between them.
Holly?
I do not let my mum and dad watch. I don't let any of my family watch. Like, I just feel more pressured. Like, see if it was like in a arena, like in Europeans, if they'd came to watch and I wouldn't be able to spot them, I think I'd be fine. But if, like, I remember when I used to go to West of Scotland Junior League when I was just started, when I was young, in Drumchapel High School, I remember my dad would just to like look in the window, like behind where I was playing, and I still knew he was up there, and I'd look and I'd tell him to go away, just because I just got that feeling, and I hated it.
So, Dave, I think that answers your question quite well. I think there is. I think, Don, you're right as well. It has that benefit of not having that tournament without coaches, because clearly it does affect players. And it also gives the reason why there's the canteens full of parents during Scottish tournaments.
I once coached my daughter when I'd left Table Tennis England. I was working for Commonwealth Games. Quick story, she's in the semi-final, the final maybe, of the national under-12s, and she's playing this young girl, and we're in Milton Keynes, and we live in Preston. It's 2.5 hours away. And she comes off for advice, having lost the first game. And I said, listen, Kate, don't worry if you lose. England are playing Samoa at rugby, quarter-final of the World Cup. I said, if you lose, we'll be home in time for the World Cup. I'll be able to watch it. As it happened, England lost to Samoa. Western Samoa, they were called in those days. Oh, Dad, she says, Dad. So she said, I'm going to win this. And then she went out, and she wins the next, and she wins the next, which was, but then what made it embarrassing for me, because I'm thinking what you were saying there, Mark, about, think for herself. It was done facetiously. It was done a bit of humour and have a laugh with her, but it was also Dave's point, making her think for herself. There was sort of motive to the madness. But what made it embarrassing for me is because obviously I just stepped down as the England coach. The father and the coach of the girl she beat, came over to me and said, I said, your daughter played great. It was a great game, and anybody could have won it. And they said, do you mind us asking, what did you say to Katie? She was a different player. I didn't dare tell them. I hope they're not listening to this now.
Again, it's amazing how the reverse psychology, because Ewing's brother, who is a senior national champion, he won the men's doubles with Ewing. I'm not going to mention the coach, but when he made his Scotland debut, Blair, he got well beaten in the first game, and he came over to the coach, whose name, it's not fair for mentioning. And the coach said, well, you got absolutely no chance here. You're not going to win. He's a much better player than you. And Blair, who, if you know Blair, he never gets angry. He'd be the best poker player the world's ever seen. He was so angry. He went on and won the next 2 games. Now, Don, does that mean he was a brilliant coach?
And we'll ask Blair.
It's a true story, Ewan, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't.
No, it is. Yeah. Okay, right. We're not going to get through everybody, but we did have our 2 young players on, Martin Johnson and Danny Badgerow, who, again, they followed the same footsteps as, first of all, Richard Yule, I suppose. Was it Malcolm Sugden? Might have been the first player to go and play abroad. And following the footsteps of Richard, of Dave Hanna, of Ewing, and they went to play abroad. And we had both Danny, and they went to play in Dusseldorf, I think, was it? Des's neck of the woods, Des Douglas's club. And we also had the coaches on as well. And I felt that was, again, a different session of how they was coping abroad. How did you find that, girls, playing abroad with 2 of the players who you know really well, Danny Badgerow and Martin Johnson?
Yeah, obviously. So I've played a lot of those guys, saw them play at the European Championships, and I think going away was what both of them saw right to do at the time. Yeah. I think it was a really good experience, especially because it's like something you've never really seen. You don't see often, I guess, in Scottish table tennis. So I think seeing them now they've come back, you can kind of see the difference that's made to them. Their games are a lot more disciplined. I think it's been interesting seeing it all happen.
And Holly, how did you find that session? Did it inspire you want to go and play abroad, or?
Well, I do think it is quite inspirational, but I don't think playing abroad is something moving abroad to play table tennis full time is something I'd want to do. But especially because I play at the same club as Martin, and during these times right now, obviously he can't be away. So it's good because he brought back different exercises and stuff, which throughout the club we've all been using and stuff, and I think it's been very beneficial for like the whole club and Table Tennis Scotland to see that people are still going away and stuff.
And what was really nice about that session, Mark and Don and Ewan, is that the two coaches, Chris Main and Dylan De Silva, how, you know, although they're rivals on the table, they saw the benefit in, they worked together. Martin's been to Dumfries, Danny's been to Ayrshire to play. And I felt that was, you know, table tennis at its best, really. And I think I'd like to see more coaches, rather than trying to keep the little secrets, working together. And I felt both Chris and Dylan, you know, opened up their clubs, and both players are better players, and probably both Dylan and Chris are better coaches because of, you know, learning. Pete Simpson used to say his favourite Chinese proverb was, "We learn from each other," you know. And I don't know if you saw that session, Ewan, or.
Well, I certainly remember the Martin and Danny session. I can't remember the coaches one particularly, but I think, you know, if you look across a number of the guests, again, kind of the Ryans, the Johnnies, the Martin and Danny, and the whole kind of move to playing abroad and experiencing that, and I think again, I think that kind of, again, even trying to draw that together with something that Craig Howson talked about. He talked about maybe he got too comfortable being as a number 2 player, and I think one of the benefits of going abroad and training abroad is that it kind of recalibrates you. It lets you be amongst better players and see that there's actually, you know, you might be a big fish in a small pond, but actually, you know, if you want to really progress and win internationally, then, you know, there's a bigger world out there. And I think that's where you can learn a lot of good habits. You can see a lot of good players, and it's good for, if you're wanting to set a long-term vision, having seen it up close and personal in terms of playing abroad, and then it can stop you being too kind of short-sighted in terms of your game, and, you know, push you on to bigger things. And in fact, actually, I can remember my first European Youth Championships. I went as a cadet, and the first day we played Holland, and then we played Germany. So my very first match at the European Cadets, I played Torben Vosik. The next match I played Trinco Keen again, you know, so I had a pretty torrid sort of start to my kind of international career. But eventually, day 2, day 3, I won a match, and I remember being all elated, you know, having won a match at the European Youths. And Richard Ewell, who was coaching at the time, came to me after and said, you know, really well done, great achievement, but don't forget, it's all about winning matches as a senior, winning international matches as a senior. That's your goal. So don't get, you know, enjoy the here and now, winning a match at the cadets, but actually don't lose sight. It's all about winning as a senior. And as I say, I think that international experience, I think that's where that can really help in terms of setting your visions high and setting your standards high.
Yeah. Okay. What we're going to do, this is going to be a 2-parter, because I'm certainly not going to go past the second to last guest we had was Brian Keane, but it was a great session. We just set him up and sat there for an hour and a half, didn't we? And we just let him talk. But what came off, what I felt was really important, girls and boys and anybody who was listening on this, is he learnt by hours on the table. Like a lot of us, he'd go to his local YMCA, the Manchester YMCA. Obviously, he was born in Scotland, didn't play table tennis, went to Manchester, started playing table tennis. But he'd go to the YMCA 4 or 5 hours, you know, every day of the week, weekends 8 or 9 hours, just like a lot of us. And sometimes I do worry about the lack of hours that we put on the time. I know they say it's not the hours you put in, it's what you put into the hours. I know that, but you've still got to put the hours in. You've still got to put, and although Brian had lots of funny stories, for some funny football stories as well. But I think he epitomised that you've got to do the hard yards. Now, have we got a comment on Brian? And have we had anything on YouTube tonight? Probably not, have we? Because it's
nothing really prominent.
Yeah. There you go. A lot of people. Right. Well, I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to ask Don if you can sum up and close the show as our guest. Don, can you do that?
Well, can I just quickly pay tribute to Brian Keane? He obviously did a great show for you. I've known Brian for over 50 years, Manchester. I used to train with him at Gatley YMCA, Manchester YMCA. And as well as what you said about epitomising you've got to put the hours in, he made it great fun. And it was always great fun to be around Brian. And I think that's one of the things I'll always take from him. You enjoy your table tennis when Brian King's around. So, yeah, great man. And as I say, he was a great part of my career as I came through, as much as I did come through. So if I'm winding up the session, that's a bit of a curveball.
Yeah, this is part one.
So, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. I think you've done an amazing job. I think Scottish Table Tennis should be really proud of these sessions. I mean, we've reviewed quite a few of them tonight, and I can see, listening to all of you speak, how passionate you are about the show. So well done to all the guests, and particularly well done to Dave for pulling it together. I join a quiz every week now, and Dave very kindly invites me, and he's the best question master that I've ever been in a quiz. His use of the English language at times, I think he's getting a bit confused with Scottish terminology and English terminology, but it's great fun. So Dave, well done. It's been a super session, and let's hope for many more. So Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy New Year. Let's hope 2021, well, it can't be a worse year than 2020 from a table tennis point of view. But yeah, let's all get ourselves through this COVID. Let's enjoy. I think we'll be okay. I think, come April, May, fingers crossed that we get back to normal and we can start training and, we start meeting up on the tournament circuit and the table tennis family, the UK table tennis family, the Commonwealth family, it's just a wonderful thing to be part of. Doesn't matter whether, like myself, I long stopped playing, but it's still, great to meet your table tennis friends. So thanks very much for inviting me, Dave. Well done. And see you all in 2021.
Yep. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Tom.